Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 129. In the Clear. Hizashi had been done rearranging furniture for several hours now. They'd moved Sho's desk to their bedroom and emptied theirs out for Midoriya to use. They hardly ever used their desk here, and if they did, it was only to grade papers, which they could do at the dining table anyways. Midoriya still only had a pull-out bed to sleep on, but given how long getting his stuff was taking, they had to assume that shopping was not in the cards today. He'd stuffed the random things that had been occupying the closet into various other places around the apartment and moved the couch bed into the corner so that it wasn't just sitting in the middle of the room awkwardly. They had planned to have leftovers for lunch, but he was so nervous that he couldn't stay still, so he started making some onigiri just to have something to do. He waited around for a while, but at the 1 hour mark, he figured he should stick the onigiri into the fridge. He paced and tidied the already tidy apartment until he couldn't stand it anymore and decided to bite the bullet. A text wouldn't be too disruptive if it was a bad time to interrupt. Shota could ignore a text if he needed to. Hizashi, what's the sitch? Shota, we're on the way back. ETA 13 minutes. He let out a sigh of relief before narrowing his eyes at his phone screen. Shota better not be texting and driving. Hizashi, this better be Midoriya texting me. Scowling frown. Shota, it is. The image brought a smile to their face. Giving someone your phone was a good way to show you trusted them. Hopefully that message had gotten across. Hizashi, all right. Thanks, kiddo. Heart. They went and sat on the balcony to wait, and as promised, approximately 13 minutes later, they spotted Sho's car pulling into the lot. They wasted no time in darting down the stairs to meet them so that they could help bring things up. When he got there, they had already started unpacking things. Sho had 2 boxes in a fold-up cart and a duffel bag in the other hand. Midoriya had his signature yellow backpack slung over his shoulders as he picked up... Wait, was that a mini fridge? They shot Shota a confused look, and he just pulled a suitcase out of the back seat and handed it to them. Hide this in the back of your closet, he instructed, not explaining anything. Alrighty then, questions later. They stuck one of the last 2 boxes on top of the suitcase and led the way back up to the apartment, opting to take the elevator this time. Midoriya hadn't said a word since they had come down, but he didn't seem as vacant as he had last night. He was present to some degree, but to what degree they had no clue, so he let them be. They set the box down next to the bathroom so that it would be close to the kids' room, but not in the way, as they went to their bedroom to hide this suitcase of something in the back of their closet, as requested. They were tempted to take a peek to see what was in there, but they figured it was Ivy's gear or something, and it wasn't their business to poke around anyway. Sho wouldn't have let them take it with them if he hadn't okayed it. By the time he felt like the suitcase was sufficiently hidden enough, Midoriya seemed to have taken another trip down to the car. He was wheeling the cart through the living room with the last box, something they couldn't recognize, and a solar panel? Well, that answered the mini fridge query, but left him with more questions than he started with. He followed Midoriya into the guest room to find Shota cutting open boxes and setting them on the bed. The two moved around each other silently. The kiddo looked more relaxed than they had seen them since he got here, but something about that didn't sit right with them. There anything I could help with? They asked from the doorway. You want to grab the hamper and get a load started? Shota prompted, nodding his head toward the duffel bag and open box full of blankets at the foot of the bed. He acquiesced and let them be. Sho would fill them in when he got a second. The clothes were actually pretty clean. Most of them didn't really need a wash, but he tossed them in regardless. It only took up 1 load to wash all the clothes anyway. Everything was threadbare and patched in several places. Hizashi was honestly impressed by the level of skill the kid seemed to have with mending. Maybe they could get him a sewing machine. Well, he was getting ahead of himself. One thing at a time. They had a feeling it was going to be enough of a struggle to force the kid to accept basic necessities first. When he walked out of the laundry room to see if there was anything else he could help with, he found Shota sitting on the couch and the door leading to Midoriya's room was shut. Shota looked up at him but didn't offer anything. Everything okay, Sho? They asked hesitantly. Shota huffed out a bitter scoff at that before answering. As okay as could be expected. He's dissociating again. But this time it seems to have been on purpose, which is troubling. His living conditions were far better than I had expected, though, which was a pleasant surprise. He has a solar generator, somehow. I didn't ask how. You saw the mini fridge. And he had a heater and a lamp. Bunch of shit. It was still an abandoned warehouse, but it was leagues better than the last place he was in. And the suitcase? They pushed. Shota let out a real scoff of laughter at that, but the smile that adorned his face turned sour quickly. Kid has a bad habit of sticky fingers when he sees a knife. I'd seen him take a few in the past, but I didn't know how bad it was. He explained, sounding achingly fond. That whole thing was just knives? It weighs a ton. They shot back, doing their best to keep their volume down low enough to not be heard through the wall. Mostly knives, yeah. Didn't get a chance to look through it all. There's easily 100 in there, maybe 200. There, he's ridiculous. Shota replied with a bittersweet smile. He had some trouble with that, though. He trailed off, and the small smile on his face fell. What do you mean? He had a corkboard up with names of people from the gang and he'd driven a knife through each one that had been arrested. It was difficult for him to take that down. Hizashi could only imagine how hard that had been for both of them. That kid had built his whole life around Ivy, and Sho had been right there with him for the past 2 years. They had no doubt that taking that gang down had been Midoriya's crowning achievement. Ivy's legacy was Midoriya's crowning achievement. Giving that up couldn't be easy to stomach. His heart ached for him. Yeah, that sounds rough, they offered lamely, sitting down next to Shota. They could hear the kid shuffling things around in his room as they sat in silence. Willingly dissociating was something that concerned them greatly. Midoriya needed therapy, probably years and years of it, given the way he acted as Ivy and the way he acted in school. They assumed that he probably had a personality disorder, but they didn't know enough about that kind of thing to be able to help. He needed a professional. That kid was not going to want to see a professional. He could hardly talk to Sho about what had happened to him, so he was pretty sure that a stranger was not in the cards. They felt so lost, and they knew Shota felt the same way. They just didn't know what to do. The social worker was due over in less than an hour, and they had yet to eat lunch. That was a much more fixable issue. That was something they could deal with. I made some onigiri a few hours ago. Ended up sticking it in the fridge. You want me to heat it up? They asked, finally breaking the silence that had fallen over them. What's in it? Tuna? It's fine cold. I don't know if he'll eat right now. I'll bring him some. We can just eat here. You want to put something on? They asked as they stood, gesturing toward the TV. Not really, no. Don't mind if you wanted to, though. It'd probably do us good, they said, pausing on the other side of the couch before they left the room completely. Yeah, Shota agreed, but made no move to turn the TV on. Masa was eager to see Midoriya again. He had been so out of it when they met, she'd hardly been able to get a read on him through that on top of her own exhaustion. The whole situation was very strange. This wasn't the first time she had worked with a child who had been homeless, but 4 years was a long time. It seemed impossible that no one had noticed anything for that long. He had to be very crafty, not only to still be alive, but to have kept his living conditions secret all the while. She also had never worked with heroes, at least not like this. They were frequently involved in the beginnings of a case, but this was the first time that a hero had insisted on taking the kid they saved home with them. She supposed that had to do with the fact that they were also the boys' teachers. She remembered how the detective had introduced this as a peculiar case. He hadn't been lying. She had gotten a good first impression of the couple, at least. She didn't doubt that they were a suitable placement, but she could imagine it was uncomfortable for the kid to suddenly be in his teacher's home. Walking up to the door, she pressed the buzzer to be let in. It didn't take long for the door to unlock, and she made her way up to the fourth floor, apartment 401. She knocked gently. When the door opened, she was greeted warmly by Yamada-san and offered a pair of guest slippers. Aizawa-san wasn't far behind, standing between the kitchen and the genkan. The apartment was nice. It didn't smell bad or like cleaning supplies, as if they had scrubbed everything in a hurry before she got there. It was inviting, and it looked tidy. She hadn't expected a hovel. The two had what, like 5 jobs between them? If they didn't have the time to clean, they certainly had the money to have someone do it for them. Their schedules had been one of the few things that she was still concerned about. Any hang-ups she had about Aizawa's harsh exterior were scrubbed from her mind when she saw how gently he had handled Midoriya after she had returned from her interview with Yamada. She had high hopes for this placement. "Can I get you anything to drink? Tea? Coffee? Water?" Yamada asked as she walked into the main area of the apartment. "No, thank you. I'm all right," she dismissed. The living room and dining room looked similarly well maintained to the kitchen and genkan. From the looks of it, it seemed as though they had a cat as well, if the cat tree next to the television was anything to go by. She was about to ask after Midoriya when she heard a door open somewhere down the hallway, and the boy in question walked out. He looked anxious. His gaze was flicking between the three of them rapidly, and he sent an awkward wave in her direction. He had been near catatonic last she saw him, so she supposed this was an improvement. "Afternoon, Midoriya," she greeted kindly. Afternoon, Miyoshi-san," he replied with a stiff bow. "How have you been settling?" she asked. She wasn't expecting a genuine answer, but she felt it polite to ask anyway. "Fine. I've, um, it's okay," he stuttered out. She wondered if this was a nervous tic or if he always spoke with a stutter. She made a mental note to ask about that. Speech therapy might be prudent. Unlearning that would only get more difficult as time went on. "I'm glad to hear it," she responded with a smile. He glanced over at Yamada awkwardly before speaking again. Is, is the laundry ready to be switched?" he asked quietly. "Oh, yeah, it probably is. I'll go do that." "No, uh, I can do it," Midori insisted. She caught the expectant look that Aizawa shot his partner before they relented and let Midori handle the laundry. Interesting. She filed that information away to analyze later. "All right, that's fine. The laundry room is through the kitchen back there. Let me know if you need any help with anything," they said as Midoriya quickly scurried past the three of them and into the kitchen. "He's still getting his room situated. We went and got his things earlier today." Aizawa brought the group's focus back. She glanced toward the laundry room before speaking up quietly enough to not be overheard. "How did that go?" "Not great, but better than expected in a lot of ways. He had a solid setup and shelter. He had gotten his hands on a generator, and he had a makeshift kitchenette. He was in the back office of an abandoned factory." Aizawa answered flatly, though she thought she heard the slightest tinge of pride in his words. Perhaps his emotions were just too subtle to be read most of the time. She could get the hang of that. "Oh, that's impressive," she replied honestly, a touch astonished. Aizawa nodded in agreement. Just as she was about to speak again, Midoriya walked back into the room. Like he had when he first left his room, he looked at the three of them like he was making sure that they weren't about to shout at him before he proceeded. She didn't have the first clue what all he had been through. She didn't know what his home life had been like before he was abandoned, but she had to assume it wasn't great if the way he was behaving was anything to go by. I'd like to talk to you in a minute, but first I wanted to speak with Aizawa and Yamada. Do you mind waiting in your room? She asked, making sure to keep her tone as light as she could without sounding patronizing. He sent back a shaky nod and scurried back to his room as quickly as he'd come out. He was probably isolating himself. That wasn't good. However, it was preferable to most other reactions he could be having. She noted how the door shut silently, as if he had turned the doorknob from the other side and twisted it back into place. He was making himself as small and unobtrusive as possible. Again, that wasn't great, but it was a fairly normal response. She hoped that these tendencies lessened, but only time would tell. How much can he hear from in there? She asked after waiting a few seconds for the boy to move away from the door. Not much. The walls are pretty well soundproof, but the doors aren't, Aizawa answered. Why don't we talk on the balcony? It's a nice day for it, Yamada offered. She agreed with a nod and let them lead the way. Yamada pulled out a chair for her at the small table and gestured for Aizawa to take the other while they sat crisscrossed on the bench by the door. The balcony was as well maintained as the apartment was, possibly even more so. There were several planters with flowers hung over the ledge, and one with some tall, leafy plant sitting on the ground in the corner. They all looked to be in very good health. How'd the night go? Is he settling well? She asked the same question she had asked before, because she expected a more honest answer from them than she did from Midoriya. Well enough. He's hardly left his room or spoken to either of us. Aizawa answered. That doesn't surprise me, she replied with bittersweet reassurance. You said you went to get his things today? She prompted him to elaborate on that. Yes, we did. He was anxious the entire time, but when we were nearly ready to leave, he hit a breaking point and started dissociating purposefully in order to power through it. That was troubling, but again, not something she wouldn't have expected. She was glad to hear that Aizawa seemed to have a grasp on trauma responses, which made sense with him being a hero. Though plenty of heroes didn't know that kind of thing, she had both seen and heard horror stories about how poorly heroes handled victims after an incident, and she was happy that these two didn't fall into that category of hero. That doesn't surprise me either. I had a concern that I wanted to bring up with you two. I saw that you both have had foster licenses for quite a few years now, but you've yet to use them. I was wondering why that is, she asked, changing the topic. Oh, yeah. We've always wanted to, but we just never had the time needed to do it properly. We were both working constantly, and that's just not something to bring a kid into. But with Midoriya, well, he's a near perfect fit. He's with us at work all day. That's not to say we're not going to cut back on our hours, though. We know that time at school isn't the same as time at home. He's been alone long enough. We're not going to do that to him again. He's probably going to wish we did, since he's so independent, but that's a bridge we can cross when we get to it, Yamada answered smoothly. Something about the way both of them answered everything seemed too perfect. She felt like there was something she was missing, but she couldn't put her finger on what. She had no reasonable argument against them, and her gut told her that the kid was safe here. He was going to be taken care of. She could leave him here in good conscience, but there was still something off. That something was going to keep her up at night. She was going to keep an eye on them, but right now she saw no reason to not allow this placement to become more permanent. Midoriya needed some form of certainty, and these two seemed all too ready to provide that. She still needed to see the rest of the apartment to make sure it was suitable before she left, but she didn't think that was going to be an issue. I'm glad to hear that. That was my chief concern with this placement. Midoriya is going to need someone at home with him with some degree of regularity, and you are right, he is probably not going to appreciate that very much. A lot of his freedom is being stripped from him. Similar situations, neglected children, I mean. I often find that they tend to lash out. They become angry because they're being babied after taking care of themselves for so long. This is quite an extreme case of that. I would advise you to be prepared for any number of things: violent outbursts, running away, self isolation, resentment toward the two of you. I wouldn't take anything off the table. This is a lot for someone to take in. His whole life was just upended. He's going to need patience, lots of patience. I would highly recommend getting a therapist or counselor for him and yourselves if you don't already have one, she warned. Aizawa seemed contemplative about what she was saying, but Yamada had his lips pressed into a fine line, and he was glancing over to his partner excitedly. It appeared as though he had caught the underlying hint that she was prepared to approve Midoriya staying with them. I'd like to speak with Midoriya and see his room before I leave. He left this in the detective's office last night, she said, extending her hand to offer her business card. I will be giving him another one, but any of you can reach out at any time, though I would prefer you only reach out for emergencies after 8 p.m. Yamada took the offered card with a grin on his face, and when Aizawa turned to look at them, his lips curled up ever so slightly at the ends. Thank you. His room is the door at the far left in the hall. Knock gently, Aizawa advised as Yamada slid the door open for them. She did as instructed and heard a quiet thump from the other side of the door before she spoke. Midoriya, it's Miyoshi-san. May I come in? She asked. Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to. And then I made a mess. She opened the door halfway through his rambling to find him sitting on the floor and gathering various tools that seemed to have fallen out the bottom of a broken box. I'll clean it up. Sorry, he continued as he furiously stuffed the mess into another intact box. It's all right. Looks like the box broke on you. That's not your fault, she reassured him. She looked around the room as he continued his task. The rest of the room looked very neat. There was a bookshelf that was mostly empty. It held a few kitchen utensils, a first aid kit, a radio, and something else she couldn't quite make out from where she was standing. Aside from the tools he was wrestling with on the floor, the most interesting thing she spotted was a mini fridge with a hot plate on top of it. It looked far too old and beat up to have belonged to Aizawa and Yamada, so she had to assume it was Midoriya's. Aizawa hadn't been kidding when he said the boy had a solid setup. That's a lot of tools. Do you like to build stuff, Midoriya? She asked. Yeah, when I can. I fix stuff mostly. Oh, is that how you got all of this? She asked, gesturing toward the fridge and the generator it was plugged into. Yeah, I found them at the dump. Wow, that is very resourceful. You fixed all of these? She asked with genuine awe. I bought the hot plate. Midoriya tried to deflect. But everything else you fixed up on your own? She pressed. Yes, I think so, he replied, looking over the appliances once more before turning back to her. Yes. That's incredible, Midoriya, she remarked as she looked around the few items in the room. The boy in question had a blush on his cheeks that was quickly spreading to the rest of his face, so she let the subject drop. He looked to have a good space set up for him, and if he had clothes in the wash right now, then that was good too. She had no doubt he could probably use a new wardrobe, but that could wait a little longer. She could see his school uniform hung up in the closet. You left this at the station last night, she said as she handed him her business card again. Sorry, he stuttered with wide eyes as he took it. That's all right. There was a lot going on. I don't blame you. I would have forgotten it too, she reassured him. He apologized far too much. It was upsetting, but she ignored that for now. Do you remember what I said? You can call me whenever you need to. I have my phone on me 24/7, she reminded him. Oh, okay, he replied hesitantly before slipping the card into the top drawer of his desk. I know I asked you last night, but you were a little out of it. Do you feel safe here? Yes, I know I'm safe here, he confirmed. He didn't sound very reassured by his own reassurance, and that was interesting phrasing. Knowing you're safe and feeling safe were two different things, and she had a feeling Midoriya knew that all too well. Do you like Aizawa and Yamada? I mean, before all this happened, you were on good terms? She asked. Yes, they're very kind, he replied. He sounded sad when he said it, but he didn't sound disingenuous. He probably didn't feel like he deserved any of the kindness they were showing him. Hopefully, that feeling would fade over time. And that hasn't changed, has it? No, ma'am, he confirmed quickly. She studied him for a moment. His body language still told her that he was terrified of everything. That much hadn't changed since their last meeting. She had a feeling there wasn't much she could do about that, though. Staying here isn't your only option, you know. I can find you somewhere else to stay if you want me to. That's my job, she offered. That's okay. He, here is here is okay. Midoriya hastily denied. That was interesting. The thought of leaving seemed to cause him more anxiety than the thought of staying. That would be good if the thought of staying didn't cause him as much anxiety as it did. As it was, the sentiment was bittersweet at best. Let me know if you change your mind, all right? He only nodded in response as he looked back to his lap. He obviously wasn't comfortable with her here. There wasn't really anything else to say anyway, so she bid him farewell and made her way back out into the common area. Yamada and Aizawa were sitting on the couch. Something was playing quietly on the TV, but it was paused quickly when she walked past the threshold of the hallway. They both looked up at her expectantly. Would you mind showing me around the apartment? She asked. Yamada sprung off the couch quickly and assented enthusiastically. Aizawa seemed unfazed by the theatrics. The two had an interesting dynamic, but it seemed to work well for them. Opposites attract, she supposed. As she had suspected, the apartment was in good shape all around. She had nothing to complain about, and she had a feeling Yamada was going to be rather excited about what she had to say next. She waited until they were back in the living room with Aizawa before she spoke up. I have no reservations about letting Midoriya stay with you two, she stated plainly with a soft smile. As expected, Yamada's face split with an ear-to-ear toothy grin. Aizawa remained largely unfazed, but when his husband turned that blinding smile in his direction, a little bit of it seemed to rub off, and a grin graced his features as well. As I said earlier, I strongly recommend getting him a therapist or counselor, and you can talk to me if you need assistance finding local practices. I don't think there's a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist in Mustafu that I haven't at least heard of, so I can help steer you in the right direction. You should give him some time to settle, but the sooner the better, she advised. They both nodded in agreement. That's all I had for you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will be back to meet with you in a week's time. The two of them exchanged a wary look at her last statement, and she raised an eyebrow as she waited for an explanation. They appeared to be silently communicating something between themselves that she didn't have the context to decipher. Midoriya should be doing an internship next week. He hasn't decided where yet, so we aren't sure whether he will be in town or not. Aizawa explained. Ah, that was troubling. Leaving so soon for an extended period of time didn't seem like a great idea, but at the same time, forcing him to miss out on a normal school experience seemed like a bad idea as well. He needed normalcy. Holding him back was only going to make things worse. The internships last a full week, or is it 5 days? Full week, Aizawa replied. Stripping him of his independence was jarring enough. Forcing it further would drive a stake between them. Whether he stayed or left was his choice, and she couldn't take that away from him. I think it would be best to let him make his own decisions about that. I assume all offers are vetted by the school? Yes, of course, Yamada answered. All right, then my next visit can wait until he's back. Make sure he has a phone before he leaves. The two of them glanced at each other again at her last comment. Got it. Aizawa replied quickly, not explaining what that glance meant. Curious. Good. Have a nice rest of your day, gentlemen. She dismissed herself with a polite bow of her head before taking her leave. Heroes were a peculiar bunch. Or maybe they were just a peculiar bunch. She didn't exactly have a great sample size. They were good people, though. That much she could say with confidence. Midoriya would be safe with them. End of chapter.